So it is my pleasure to introduce Adina. She earned her degree in dietetics from McGill University, and she has been offering individual consultations and nutrition training since 2019. She's a registered dietitian nutritionist. She collaborates with Brio to promote healthy and sustainable eating habits. She is known for her ability to make nutrition information clear and accessible and to demystify common beliefs around food. Her consultations and training program are grounded in solid scientific evidence, ensuring reliable recommendations that guides as many people as possible toward healthier eating habits. So, Adina, the floor is now yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is able to hear me properly. I would like to say a special thanks to Julia, who did this kindful presentation, and thank you as well to Felix, which was behind all the organization of this presentation, and in general to Brio, who has offered me the opportunity to speak about the topic, which I find very interesting, and I hope it will spark just as much interest in you. So without any delay, I'll share my screen with everyone. There you go. And Julia, can you just let me know that you can see it properly?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Excellent. So for today, we're going to discuss managing anxiety and depression through nutrition. And before we start, I would just like to say that this presentation is intended for the general population and is primarily preventative in purpose. If you have a diagnosed psychological disorder, please discuss it with your doctor or registered dietitian before making any changes so you can have some tailored recommendations. Today, we will discuss the link between nutrition and mental well-being. We're going to discuss beneficial foods, inflammatory foods, and the gut microbiota. Before we do so, I thought it would be interesting for you to know who I am, not only because it would likely help us to connect together, but also to give you an overview of what I'm doing as a work as a registered dietitian. So just like Julia was mentioning, I had graduated a while ago, but I was very fortunate even during my stages to have all the positions that I wanted. So I started at the Jewish General and I was working on oncology. I was working with radiotherapy and chemotherapy patients. And then right after my stage supervisor, she had this super great idea. She was like, you had a hard time on this field. Let's put you with newborn children. So I was lucky to work in pediatrics, just to bring back my hopes after having staged that hard. So right away, I did oncology, I did pediatrics, I graduated, I started working privately and at the Children's Montreal with pregnant women. I was in charge of all the clinics on the floor, so whether women had gestational diabetes, whether they had twins or triplets, or they had any medical conditions that required them to see a nutritionist on a more regular basis. I acquired a lot of knowledge throughout those experiences, and then I decided to invest in my private practice. And that's where Brio came in at the same time. I started offering consults through the Employee Assistance Program. And then out of the blue, my niche became even bigger, and I started working a lot with women, especially women health, which had problems with fertility, with polycystic ovarian syndrome, with endometriosis, with menopause. And in the end, I ended up asking myself, why am I getting all sorts of patients? I'm working with pregnant women, with women health, oncology, cancer patients, pediatrics. What do they all have in common? And it made me realize that what they had in common was their sensitivity. So in the end, just giving them general recommendations as I've learned it during my bachelor, or just presenting them Canada's food guide wasn't sufficient. I had clients that came up into my office and they were telling me, well, I have hypothyroidism. I don't want to take Synthroid or medication. Help me out. And at first, well, it got me out of my comfort zone because they've never told me how to do it before. So that's when research came in. So I started reading a lot. I started investing a lot of time in this, discovering other ways, alternative ways as well to help my patients. And I find it very important to mention because you're going to see throughout the conference today, throughout the webinar, I've included the references that you can always look on your own as well if you want. And I'll always mention you what's the consensus as of 2025, which we just finished. Where are we at in terms of scientific literature? However, I find it very interesting to add a bit of note of what I'm seeing as a professional on top of that, because you are going to see that I'm going to use a lot of words such as may or potentially or a study suggest, not because I don't know them, because I've read all of them that I was able to, but because the science is evolving very quickly in terms of nutrition, which is fortunate, but at the same time, as a nutritionist, we need to keep being up to date. But even as we are up to date on the literature, there are a lot of things that become harder and harder to study. Why? Because, for example, let's look at artificial sweeteners, where some of them have been classified as possibly carcinogenic. Why do we use possibly? Why is it not sure? It's because it depends on how the person eats, what are their habits, what's the baseline, how is their metabolism reacting. And on top of that, we fortunately are not doing the same studies as we used to do before. We could basically do anything with the subject that we were studying. Now, if we have a doubt that something can be carcinogenic, obviously we're not going to give it to the people, knowing that it may have an impact on your health. So overall, what I always tell in consultation as well, you are the best person who knows their body best. So if I'm making any recommendations, if you try something, if you're seeing a dietitian, always see how you're looking, always have a look at how you're feeling, and then we can adjust and personalize, because there's so many sensitivities, there's so many different bodies, and the best is just to make you feel better on the long term. So let's now begin with the key nutrients that are going to support mental well-being. If we look at the vitamins, certain vitamins play key roles in brain function, antioxidant defense, and deficiencies may negatively affect mood and cognitive function. We're going to go through all of them afterwards, but just to have a quick overview, we're going to look at minerals, which specific minerals are essential for neurotransmission, brain signaling, hormonal regulation, and inadequate intake may contribute to mood disturbances and fatigue. Omega-3s, especially long chains such as EPA and DHA, have been associated with brain health and may play a role in supporting mood, partly through anti-inflammatory mechanisms. Proteins, they provide amino acids such as tryptophan, which is a precursor involved in serotonin synthesis and mood regulation. And finally, fiber supports a healthy gut microbiota, which may influence the gut-brain axis and overall mental well-being. If we look at the best diet to be able to prevent, more than anything, anxiety and depression, the Western dietary pattern has been compared with the Mediterranean style diet, and the Mediterranean style diet has been associated with a better mood and fewer depressive symptoms. The studies are a bit clearer in terms of the effects on depression and a bit less in terms of anxiety. I've included both, just mentioning how confident are we about the results. This dietary pattern, speaking about the Mediterranean style diet again, emphasizes a higher intake of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and fish. And it also encourages a lower intake in terms of processed meats, refined grains, added sugars, and other foods commonly associated with a more pro-inflammatory dietary pattern. You probably have already heard about the Mediterranean diet before, and I did the summary over here, integrating a bit of everything I've learned about the Mediterranean diet, which initiated about the 1960s, but also a lot of things such as, let's say, soy products, which are very interesting in terms of prevention and hormonal health. And the way that we're going to look at this pyramid is that every single food has its place in your diet, but just in different quantities, which makes it even more attainable for a lot of people, because we know if there's a restriction, you're likely not going to adhere it on the long term. You're going to tell yourself, maybe I'm going to follow my rules for 3, 4, 6 months, 1 year if you're lucky, But as soon as you go back to your old patterns, you're going to have a rebound where you're going to do what we call the yo-yo. You're going to have cravings, binges, so it's not sustainable on the long term. While the Mediterranean diet just tells you that you can eat sweets on top of the pyramid, just like you should eat fruits and vegetables, but just at different regularities. And if we start with the bottom of the pyramid, you're going to see it's the biggest part of the pyramid because it includes already about 3/4 of your balanced plate. It's going to include fruits and vegetables, whole grains, lots of spices and herbs, which are going to give you all those anti-inflammatory properties, and healthy fats such as extra virgin olive oil, for example, avocado, and more. This should be your baseline for every single meal. And then we're going to have a look at every single day. So in terms of the Mediterranean diet, we should consume about 1/4 cup, a handful of nuts and seeds per day, especially for nutrients such as magnesium. And optimally, we should consume about one vegetarian meal per day. Let's say a lentil soup, or let's say a miso soup with tofu in there, or you could have a minestrone with beans, or anything that basically has legumes or soy products in there. And on top of that, dairy products, especially at breakfast and snacks, so you don't interfere with the absorption of iron at lunch and supper. And this is going to include as well fermented foods, which are going to provide you probiotics such as cheese, kefir, yogurt, on top of milk or soy products, and alternatives if you're intolerant to lactose or the milk protein. Going higher up on the scale, you're going to see that fish comes quite quickly for the omega-3s we're going to discuss together, and seafood to complement, and all the white meats such as poultry or chicken and eggs, which should be consumed about 3 to 4 times a week, 2 to 3 eggs in a portion. You shouldn't be eating eggs every single day, not because it's bad, not because it raises your cholesterol. This is a myth. It's more because it's going to replace something else that could be beneficial, such as fermented foods from yogurt in your breakfast. And then on the top of the pyramid, we already spoke about the sweets and processed foods. And then comes as well red meats and charcuteries, processed meats, which we should limit to about once or twice a week. If we now look at specific vitamins, the key ones that are going to be involved in mood regulation are going to be the B vitamins, such as B6, B9, B12, which are involved in neurotransmitter synthesis, such as serotonin and dopamine. Then we're going to have deficiencies, especially B12 and folate, which are associated with depressive symptoms. And finally, vitamin C and vitamin E, which have an antioxidant role, which are protective against oxidative stress. Where do you find all those vitamins? B6, especially poultry, fish, potatoes, bananas, chickpeas, and nuts. If you look at folate, it's going to be mainly leafy green vegetables, legumes, lentils, beans, asparagus, avocado, and citrus fruits. Then if we continue with B12, animal foods such as meat, fish, eggs, milk, yogurt, and cheese. And it is also found in fortified plant beverages and some fortified nutritional yeast. And finally, vitamin E, nuts and seeds, especially almonds, sunflower seeds, avocado, and spinach. And vitamin C, which I haven't written over here, it's going to be mainly in all the fruits and vegetables. And I know a lot of people, which I see in consults, for example, they're going to take a vitamin C supplement to prevent from colds, preventing getting sick. However, it's less than necessary. Why? Because just by consuming, for example, bell pepper throughout the day, it's going to give you 100% of your vitamin C intake. Very achievable just by having enough fruits and vegetables, and you're not going to get only the vitamin C. You're going to get a lot of different vitamins in there. You're going to get a lot of antioxidants as well. And you're going to decrease your risk of having kidney stones, which can be provoked by high doses of vitamin C supplementation. If we go back to the pyramid, just like I was mentioning before, magnesium is involved in stress response and nervous system regulation. Zinc is linked to neurotransmission and immune function, and low magnesium and zinc levels have been associated with depressive symptoms. Where do we find them? We're going to find them mainly in nuts, seeds, legumes, whole grains, dark leafy greens, and cocoa powder. In terms of zinc, it's going to be mainly fish, meat, shellfish, dairy products, eggs, legumes, nuts, seeds, and whole grains. And coming back here, as you've seen it, iron is also an essential mineral in terms of oxygen transport and cognitive function, and iron deficiency is usually leading to a lot of fatigue, poor concentration, and low mood. A lot of people that I see in consultation may have low iron reserves, which is interesting to test because it's easy to see where are your levels. You can ask your doctor, for example, and have a look with your registered dietitian. And the important thing here to keep in mind is that you may have low iron reserves before having iron deficiency anemia because it goes down by steps. There are 5 different steps in general. You're going to lower your ferritin, which are your iron reserves. You're going to then lower your transferrin saturation, which are the transporters that bring the iron around inside your body. Then the composition of your red blood cells is going to be altered. And then afterwards, later on, you're going to see a drop in terms of hemoglobin. However, symptoms such as depressive moods or fatigue or shortness of breath or hair loss or brittle nails can happen very early on. They're going to start appearing in some people when only the first stage is attained, when you start having lower reserves, which is why in nutrition we use the functional objectives in nutrition rather than just looking at your hemoglobin levels to be able to determine if you could benefit from improving your diet, seeing how you better absorb iron, how to limit foods such as dairy products, for example, which can block the absorption of iron, or supplement in the last case if it's necessary to bring your levels back up before maintaining them with nutrition. Another very interesting mineral is iodine, which is critical for thyroid function, and it affects mood and energy. And in terms of iron, we're going to find it mainly in red meat, poultry, fish, legumes, lentils, and tofu. And iodine is going to be found mainly in iodized salt, seafood, dairy products, eggs, and seaweed. I'm not a fan of supplementing if it's not necessary. We're always, as a nutrition, we're going to go food first. However, iodine is a tricky one because it really depends on what the dairy, the cows, or the chickens are going to be fed to be able to determine how much iodine is going to be found in the dairy products and the eggs, which makes it very hard to control. Because we also tend to use a lot of the soil, we're overproducing, there's less and less iodine that's going to be found in the soil, and therefore it's going to be accumulated in foods such as potatoes. This is the reason why I tend to recommend a lot of using iodized salt instead of just relying on those food sources, because we do not consume as much seafood or seaweed as we should. And because of that, iodine can go down and it can have a direct impact on your thyroid gland. Going back to fish, the recommendations in terms of fish to be able to obtain enough EPA and DHA, which are the long chain omega-3s, are going to be to consume fish such as fatty fish, especially such as salmon, rainbow trout, mackerel, herring, and sardines, about 2 to 3 times a week. This is going to give you the baseline to be able to benefit from all the reduction of inflammation, for example, associated with omega-3s. And finally, vitamin D, which is not a vitamin that you necessarily get from your food alone. Although we have increased the supplementation, so the government has admitted an increase in terms of the vitamin D that they supplement, for example, in milk, most of the time it's not going to be sufficient, and we need to get it mainly from the sun. So during summer months, it's great. We're being exposed to the sun. We have short sleeves. We're going to go in shorts outside. Just by exposing yourself to the sun between 15 to 45 minutes, depending on how dark your skin is, it's going to be sufficient and your body will be able to produce it on its own. The problem is that we live in North America, so we have fall, winter, and spring, which are kind of cold, and the sun does not hit us with the same intensity because it's kind of oblique. And because of that, because we're covered and we're not exposed, and we don't have the sun being as strong as it is during the summer months, we're not producing enough. And a lot of people that I have, again, in consultation, they're going to have lower vitamin D levels in their blood. And in general, vitamin D deficiency is often associated with depression. It's not the cause, but it can have an impact. If your vitamin D status is already inadequate, supplementation will have an impact. But if it's adequate, maybe you're not going to see anything else. You just need to keep supplementing to be able to maintain your levels being normal. If you suspect a deficiency, the best is to discuss it with your physician to either have a prescription or to be able to measure your 25-hydroxy vitamin D. So in terms of foods, we used to get vitamin D naturally because let's see the older populations that they used to feed on marine mammals, for example, or they used to eat a lot of organ meats, or they used to eat much more fatty fish. They were able to obtain enough vitamin D just by food alone, but it's not our case anymore because we don't have our food intake is not related. It's not the same as it used to be. So that's why usually just having drops, vitamin D drops, without any additives as much as possible would be the best solution. And right now, vitamin D comes from lanolin, which is extracted from sheep's wool. And it's one of the best ways to absorb it in your body. And usually we recommend about 1,000 to 2,000, depending on your skin, depending on your weight, because vitamin D is stored in fat. And again, the best way is just to discuss it with a nutritionist, or your doctor may have prescribed 10,000 units per week, which is also well absorbed. Just be careful if you start supplementing with vitamin D, there's an upper limit that we try to avoid going across of 4,000 international units because you may have adverse side effects if you're accumulating too much vitamin D in your fat sources. The importance of eating at regular times comes from the importance of producing serotonin, which comes from tryptophan, the precursor. Eating at regular times can ensure adequate intake of protein as an essential amino acid as tryptophan because the body has limited capacity to be able to store them. Protein intake should be spread across the day to have a better absorption and a better utilization. And good sources of proteins are going to be your animal products, but also your vegetable, plant-based proteins such as legumes and soy. And on top of that, the nuts and seeds that you can have in terms of snacks. Let's now discuss the gut microbiota. It is called our second brain because basically the gut microbiota is a vast community of bacteria, viruses, and fungi that live in our intestines, and they play an important role in health by influencing not just your digestion. So if you have what we call dysbiosis or IBS, intestinal bowel syndrome, you can see more diarrhea or constipation, but the topic of today is not discussing your digestive health. We're going to focus especially on the gut-brain axis, which can impact aspects such as mood and brain function. What is the gut-brain axis? Is what connects the central nervous system and therefore the brain and the spinal cord with the enteric nervous system, the gut. Since the gut contains billions of microorganisms that are going to influence your mental well-being, they're going to interact with neurotransmitters such as serotonin, dopamine, GABA, which are involved in mood regulation. It's also going to modulate inflammation and immune responses, which may in turn influence depression and anxiety. And it could also influence the stress response through the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which plays a key role in terms of cortisol regulation. So how do we take care of our microbiota? We do so by having probiotics and prebiotics in our diet. Very small difference. There's one letter that changes because it's basically the same thing. One comes before the other. Probiotics are the live organisms, microorganisms that you can have in your gut. And you can also reinforce those organisms by eating fermented foods such as yogurt, kefir, cheese, raw fermented vegetables such as sauerkraut or kimchi. You can have miso, you can have kombucha, tepache. Just be careful with kombucha. I know it's a trend right now, and kombucha can be very healthy. Unfortunately, the way that they're producing it and selling it, it's going to be something that we need to take into consideration because it's just like filling my glass. If I fill up my glass with good foods and probiotics, it's great. It's going to make me feel better. But if on top of that, I add a lot of processed sugars, and on top of that, I add artificial sweeteners, it's just like making a hole at the bottom while I'm losing all the good properties that I'm consuming. And another way to be able to do it is either doing it at home if you want to jump into this project, or you could also do it with Dt.P. If some of you are interested, I have a very nice recipe that I can share with you. What's Dt.P is basically just fermenting the skin and the core of a pineapple. And this way it makes a very sparkly juice that it's not going to be as sweet because the bacteria are going to ferment the sugars that are going to provide them through the fermentation. And then come the prebiotics. So prebiotics are the foods or some type of fibers. Not all fibers have prebiotics properties, but most of them. So instead of just learning the foods that you should eat that have prebiotics, just having a variety of fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and soy foods, it's going to make sure that you're able to feed the good bacteria that you already have in your gut. So you're consuming fermented foods to get more bacteria, and you make sure that the bacteria are not going to die and be kicked out of your intestines by feeding them properly. And those bacteria are going to ferment those prebiotics to be able to produce their own foods afterwards. And this is one of the reasons why a long-term low FODMAP diet, it's going to feel great at first. So let's say you have IBS, going back to my example. If you've been diagnosed with IBS, maybe the doctor or the nurse is going to tell you, just avoid all the foods that have FODMAPs in there. You're going to feel great because now what's IBS is that you have a dysbiosis, you have a dysregulation in your gut bacteria. Okay, so just by not feeding them, you're not going to have as much bloating, or maybe you're not going to have as much diarrhea, but it's going to be very short-term lived because then afterwards, the bad bacteria are still going to multiply in some way, even if you don't feed them with those good foods, but you're going to lose all the good bacteria that were inside your gut. So then in a few years, you're going to feel great at the beginning. And then in a few years, now you realize I have a lot of clients that come in and they tell me, I can't even digest salad even though salad doesn't have much in there. Why so? Because now we need to rework everything, bring back, and that's when supplements in terms of probiotics can be interesting. But again, discuss it with your dietitian because there are different strands for different conditions. If you take a probiotic for constipation while you have diarrhea, you're just going to make it worse, and you shouldn't rely on them on the long term. It's a treatment to bring your microbiome back to normal health, and then you reintroduce those FODMAP foods because those are going to be the foods that are going to, the prebiotics that are going to feed your good bacteria in your gut. Looking now at added sugars and ultra-processed foods, studies have shown that the higher intake has been associated with inflammation and changes in the gut microbiota. I think most of us know that added sugars, ultra-processed food, they don't make us feel very good. Why? Because a systematic review and meta-analysis found that dietary intake was associated with a 21% higher risk of depression in general population. Again, could have an impact on your gut and therefore can have an impact on your brain later on. However, further high quality researches and studies are needed to be able to confirm those associations and more than anything, clarify the underlying mechanisms. Then you're going to think, okay, so I'm cutting down on my sugar intake because it's great to also reduce my caloric intake and to be able to control my weight. So a lot of people are going to turn towards low and no calorie sweeteners. Are they any better? Probably not. Again, although we don't have enough studies to show that aspartame or sucralose or stevia can have an impact on the gut microbiota, they can alter microbial composition and metabolic and inflammatory pathways. The science is still evolving, and what I tell my clients is that if you see a benefit, if you see some improvements by just replacing them with natural sugars such as maple syrup, honey, panela, or coconut sugar, which are mildly refined in small quantities. Obviously, you don't want to cause yourself a diabetes just by trying to improve your sugar intake. If you start feeling better, and on top of that, just not mood-wise, but I have a lot of clients that report, for example, using stevia in their coffee every single morning and in their tea at every single break. It makes them more addicted, if you want, in a sense, although it's not a real addiction, but that's how people describe it. They make them crave more sugar throughout the day. Well, just try to lower it down. go gradually and see how your mood and also your digestion and also your energy level improves. If you see some improvements, even though I don't have the studies to prove it right now, well, you're better off this way than waiting 10 years and then think, oh, maybe I should have listened to the dietitian, which was making some suppositions over here, just because, again, what matters most is how you're feeling on a day-to-day basis. If we look at the consensus as of 2025, research suggests that the response appears to depend on baseline microbiota diversity, metabolic profile, and overall dietary context. In simpler words, what does it mean is that if someone that's very healthy is given a diet Coke, for example, maybe they're not going to see any impacts because they're going to go back to eating healthy the next day, versus someone that already has a diet that's not very diversified and they have a dysbiosis, their gut is not going so well, they have digestive symptoms. Well, maybe in those people, you're going to see a higher impact. So when we compare both and we do an analysis of the research, in the end, it just shows that there's no effect at all. But is there really no effect, or we're just struggling to have the good methods to be able to compare it from one person to the other? If we look now at another additive, which are emulsifiers, certain emulsifiers, and maybe the ones that you are going to want to keep in mind is carboxymethyl cellulose, polysorbate 80, and carrageenan, which have been studied for the potential impact on their good health. Some studies suggest that CMC and P80 may alter the gut microbiotic composition, including reduced microbiota diversity and shifts toward the pro-inflammatory profile. These emulsifiers have also been associated with changes in the intestinal barrier, these increased intestinal permeability, and they may contribute to inflammation, although much of the evidence comes from animal and early human studies. It's going to take, again, much longer to see impact because it's not something that happens from day to day. Maybe it's going to be seen in months. Maybe you're going to start feeling it in years. It's very hard to have something as of today. But again, if we look at the ESPEN guideline that I usually use in consultation to make my recommendations with patients that have a lot of digestive issues, such as inflammatory bowel disease, which includes Crohn's disease and more than ulcerative colitis, the consensus says that the pro-inflammatory effect of carboxymethyl cellulose has been demonstrated in preclinical studies and recently in healthy subjects. Although the data seems preliminary, a conscious recommendation of avoiding them seems to be justified, especially since we have so few dietetic recommendations that can be made for IBD prevention. So again, just like with the IARC, which is the organism that makes recommendations in terms of how carcinogenic the substances are, sucralose have been classified as possibly carcinogenic. We haven't changed the recommendations in terms of the doses, just because we don't know for sure if it has an impact, and we can study it for sure to be able to see if it has a clear impact in human studies. So what do? We live in a world where most of the things have been processed. Now, if you compare two foods, maybe they weren't the best before, but they had 3 ingredients. Now we have more than 10. If you can choose products that have ingredients that you can read as less as possible, and choosing organic options could be a good option, could be a good idea, as they tend to contain fewer additives and more controlled ingredient lists. If there's something that you can't read, if there's something that you have no idea what it is, maybe avoiding it would be better, so you don't find out in a few years that eating a yogurt with some emulsifiers in there for every single day had an impact on your health. And I know it's annoying, but if you can prefer sauces or dressings or nut butters where the ingredients are visible or they naturally separate, for example, natural peanut butter, take the smooth one and mix it around. But this is going to be your proof that there's no emulsifier that has been added in there. Versus the other ones, yes, they're mixed, but they're mixed not because they're natural, because they have added some substances to help the texture to be maintained together. Common sources of emulsifiers include packaged baked goods, pastries, brioche, industrial breads, margarine spreads, ice cream, frozen desserts, processed cheeses, ready-made sausages and dressings, and instant soups. In the end, here the recommendation, just like the Mediterranean diet, is not to deprive yourself from any pleasure by eating those foods. It's just to make sure that you're conscious about your decisions. You know that you're going to eat some ice cream. Maybe you chose the ice cream that doesn't have the carrageenan in there, even better. And when you're consuming it, you're just mindful that I'm consuming it because it's pleasant. Your body is not going to react as it would if there's a restriction, because you can cause yourself some oxidative stress just by being scared to eat a certain food. And then in the end, you just have a diet that is going to be looking like the pyramid. So you're going to get a lot of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants to allow your own body to be able to clean any substance that you may have ingested. And to conclude, those are my references. Again, for the ones that are interested in looking at them, I try to use mostly randomized controlled trials or meta-analysis or literature reviews whenever it was possible. And thank you for listening. I hope this webinar was informative, and I would be happy to answer any questions if any of you would have.